Let's start with a discussion of what are transition services. In terms of the goal or purpose behind transition services, the purpose is to take a high school student essentially and facilitate the transition into post-secondary education, a college, a university, or a vocational trade school. Additionally, another type of transition would be into integrated employment. So as you can tell, the purpose of transitional services aligns itself with the purpose behind Employment First, and that's why we're talking about transition services today. In terms of who's involved in transition services, who oversees them, the primary player are the schools, school districts, as overseen by ISB, ISBE, with collaboration from the Department of Rehabilitation Services, DRS. And so those two entities collaborate and work together to try to transition high school kids by figuring out what their interests are, what their objectives are, by providing the right instruction and evaluation to lead to employment objectives. Now, what you see mainly on this screen are areas where transition plans are falling short, starting with the second bullet indicating that at age 14 and a half, by law, students who have an IEP, an individualized education program, often will have goals that are lacking within that document. And part of the problem is that schools wait until these kids are seniors in high schools to figure out what their employment goals are, rather than starting at an earlier age. They're required by age 14 and a half, which is roughly a freshman year in high school, to develop specific goals for employment, but oftentimes schools wait until these students are seniors in high school and it becomes too late. What we also see as part of the IEP process is very cursory interest inventories, as opposed to a formal assessment by a trained evaluator to figure out exactly what are the preferences of the student, what skill set do the students currently have, what skill sets do these students need to meet some employment objective or interest that they have. Oftentimes, the transition plan will be a one-size-fit-all plan. For instance, we'll see school districts coming up with a plan to have students, handle recycling or making copies for staff, whereas it should be a plan that takes into account the interests and preferences of the student. It has to be an individualized plan, and we're not seeing that. We also see that some school districts shift responsibilities to parents and make parents the people in charge of transition services, and that's not what the law requires, nor is it a productive way to meet the goal of transition services. One of the fundamental problems that we see with transition plans is that there's an assumption or presumption made when students are very young, and that is they're unemployable. At the age of 8, 9, and 10, we see that within these IEP plans, there's no academic goals being set forth. So at a very young age, the decision is made, well, that this student will not cover academic goals, and as a result, that student won't be employable. So we've got to shift the mindset. We've got to do a better job early on identifying academic goals for the student, so when the student gets older, that student has a chance to become employed. One of the other problems we see is that schools may not take advantage of the Secondary Transitional Experience Program, or known as STEP. STEP is funded by DRS. Its purpose is to help students with disabilities develop work habits, and provide opportunities for careers. And this is an opportunity that schools have to contract with DRS. And we see sort of a big variance. Some schools contract, some don't. When they do contract, they use their discretion about what students to refer. And so there's sort of a lack of uniformity and not taking advantage of an opportunity that's available from the state. Another issue we see is with respect to the Interagency Coordination Council, or Coordinating Council, also known as ICC. ICC is co-chaired by ISB and DRS. Its role is to collect data, student outcomes, how students are doing in terms of progressing to post-secondary education, vocational schools, or integrated employment, to collect that information and then make recommendations as it relates to it. And what we're seeing is a lack of reporting. We were able to, the last report we were able to find actually that ICC issued to the governor and General Assembly dates back to 2011. Now we understand that ICC is being revitalized, and we just need to keep a close eye on them to make sure they're doing their job. So in terms of recommendations, you can find these on page 28 of the blueprint. The first one that's on this slide is to require IEPs for students with disabilities to be based on a presumption of employability. We need to change the mindset that schools use when they undergo the IEP process with students. Have academic goals be the basis, or at least the foundation, for IEPs. And that'll translate into an expectation later on that these students are employable. Second, require transition plans to contain specific employment and or post-secondary education goals starting at age 14 and a half. That's what the law requires. And that's what should be done. At age 14 and a half, there's a requirement in Illinois to have a transition plan in place and to require the students, teachers, and the administration to come up with employment goals. Third, empower students and parents with the information and resources needed, such as a training toolkit. We found that in Washington, D.C. in particular, they've got a website that they aptly call the Training Toolkit website, with a lot of information about how to go through the process, what rights you have as a student with a disability, and how you can navigate through the process and take advantage of funding and resources available. And you know, from the most sort of basic questions that arise. Illinois doesn't have anything that's similar. And you know, it's again, information is knowledge, and it's a very useful website. Finally, we recommend that the ICC should be utilized to, on an annual basis, gather and report transition data, to issue recommendations to improve service delivery. The data will help inform the recommendations. And you know, we're going to need somebody to take the lead on this. It seems like ISBE is in the best position to do so, since they do co-chair the ICC.